It's another Football Friday on News OK Live. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman, joined by our esteemed college football coverage team. From his home in leafy green, Norman, Oklahoma, OU beat writer Jason Kersey. From the newsroom just above me, here at 9000 North Broadway, or just below me, sorry, I always get that mixed up, OSU beat writer Kyle Fredrickson. From her parents' home in lovely Clay Center, Kansas, columnist Jenny Carlson.
Greetings.
And from somewhere along I-35, as part of the mass migration down to the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Sooner fans and Sooner football coverage teams, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Hi, Ryan. Hey, guys, let's jump right in and talk about the Sooners and the Texas Longhorns. We put out a section today, Red River Extra, and the theme was there's a new show. It's the Bob and Charlie Show, Jason. You wrote about it. Barry wrote about it. We compared a lot of things, a lot of similarities actually between the two coaches, Bob Stoops, Charlie Strong. But one of the things that stood out to me is just how everything is changing. What do you think this new coach at Texas is going to do to the character, sort of the emotion of the OU Texas series?
Well, I think the Bob Stoops-Mac Brown rivalry was really fun, and it lasted a long time, and I think everybody enjoyed it. Both of them had some success against each other. Obviously, Bob won more games against Mac than Mac won against Bob, but that was always an interesting dynamic. Now you introduced a new coach into it, and Bob insists that it doesn't change anything for him, and I don't know whether he's telling the truth or not, but that's what he says, and because he says we don't play, the players play. But I still think it infuses new life into Texas's programs specifically, and I think as a result of that, it sort of does the same for the Red River game.
Ryan Aber, you're on your way down there. You've been there for some of these games. You and Jason have covered a lot of them. Jenny, you have too. Ryan, there's something missing, though. In fact, Jenny wanted to write about it again, and I sort of put the brakes on. I apologize, Jenny. We had a great collective wisdom of Mac Brown. We had another column on Mac Brown. It seems like the ghost of Mac Brown is sort of hovering over this, but there's no more, let me answer that for Chris. There's no more asterisks. There's no more flyovers. There's some of the zaniness from the Texas side seems to gone out of it. Are we somehow diminished at all with this OU Texas game now that Mac's not here anymore, Ryan?
I think I'll miss the wackiness of Mac Brown and the fact that you're never going to get those moments like the ones you mentioned, especially the I'll answer that for him and some of those fun times that we've had with Mac. But at the same time, I think Charlie Strong has, like Jason said, re-energized the Texas fan base and in turn re-energized this rivalry. I really like the direction that Texas is headed. I think it's good for the Big 12 and OU when OU and Texas are both playing really well. And I think obviously they've got some growing pains to go through, but I think Texas is going to be back at the level that they were just a few years ago under Mac Brown in the next 2 or 3 years under Charlie Strong. It's just going to take some time.
Jenny, we're going to miss Mac. I'm having regrets. I should have let you write one more time about how much you're going to miss Mac. So since I didn't, why don't you just go ahead and tell us now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody sort of flashes back to let me answer that for Chris and those sorts of things. And I mean, that other stuff you mentioned, that wasn't really Mac's doing per se, but I think that, him being the face of Texas football and kind of the slick face. I mean, I think for a lot of folks in our neck of the woods, the whole happy, positive attitude and always, throwing up the hook and horns and talking up his team and, sort of car salesman aspect of things. I think people really came to, love to hate Mac Brown. And, I mean, I'm with Ryan. I think that Charlie Strong is going to get the program going in the right direction. But, there's just something about Mac and the way he personified Texas football for 16 years that, you don't have with Charlie Strong. Maybe we will one day, but I don't think so. I think Mac's just a different kind of guy, different kind of personality. And I just don't think that, we're going to have that same sort of person to hate on the Texas side of things necessarily. So, people can come to hate Charlie Strong and Texas football for other reasons, like if they get back to contending for national championships, but it just won't be the same. We won't sort of have the same face on Texas football as we did with Mac Brown.
Right before we go back onto the field and talk about OU Texas, let's bring in Kyle Frederickson. Kyle, you've got an outsider's view of the OU Texas rivalry. You grew up in Colorado. You went to school there for a couple years, came here, went to Oklahoma State. Just wondering what your view of OU Texas was from afar growing up.
I mean, it's one of the most premier rivalries in all of sports, and from that outsider's view, I think the one thing that I always just remember is just the amazing separation of colors just within the Cotton Bowl with your crimson on one side and your burned orange on the other. But you're right. I think without Mac, it definitely kind of throws it for a loop. Just for me as someone who's watched a lot of these games growing up, because he was so synonymous with that program, and obviously we've seen so much turnover with Charlie Strong already with all the dismissals and trying to kind of establish a new culture in Austin there. So, I think this is the start of what should be another interesting chapter and what's already a storied rivalry.
One of the things we're really going to miss is Mac's name. Guys, you might remember this going all the way back before What's the Headline became a hashtag. We asked and solicited readers' suggestions for the OU Texas game. And once upon a time, Smack Brown was our headline, as in Smackdown, Smack Brown, get it? The other one, but my favorite one, Jenny, was the 12-0 game the Sooners played. I guess it was Adrian Peterson's freshman year, really a defensive battle. And one of the Texas fans here in Oklahoma City suggested, and it was on October 5th, and the headline was Stinko de Maco. Makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, I don't know how, but you know what? Charlie Strong, I mean, there's options there, right? I mean, Charlie, we can play off of Charlie a little bit. Obviously, Strong play a little bit. So I think there's a possibility, but it probably won't be as much fun. Let's put it that way.
One thing we never did do, we never did Mac Brown, Charlie Brown. We never did Bob Stoops as Lucy holding the football and pulling it out. That was one that was always there. And Jason, where were you? When, here we are sitting around thinking of ideas, and you're saying Dance Dance Revolution instead of the obvious, Peanuts.
Oh, boy.
Hate to bring that up. Okay.
No, you don't. You love to bring that up. Who are you kidding?
On to the field, Jason. It's been a tough week for Trevor Knight. Will Saturday be any better?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the game plan. I think that, this seems to be a good time coming off a loss when the team is a little desperate to take the reins off of Trevor Knight and let him run around. And I think if they do that, he might have a really great game. If they keep trying to do what they did with him in TCU, and make him a pocket passer, which he's just not, then I don't know how good a game he's going to have, because Texas still has a pretty darn good defense.
Ryan, it got so bad after the loss to TCU on the radio, there was actually longing for the days of Landry Jones. Now, Landry Jones, Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was the most successful punching bag of all time in OU football history. And yet we've gotten him back out and said, oh, those were the days. Is Trevor Knight in a position right now where they don't quite, OU is in a bind about what to do with him?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were talking to me or Jenny right there.
Sorry.
But, yeah, I think that they are a little bit. It surprised me how little they've run Trevor Knight, given his success in the pocket over the course of his career. I mean, you look at that Sugar Bowl game, and that looks right now like an aberration. Didn't have to run the ball a whole lot in that game, but every other time that Trevor Knight has been successful, it's because he's been moving the ball on the ground, and they really haven't done that much. I know a big part of that is their fear of injury with him, but at the same time, if OU is going to be successful, they're going to have to move the ball with Trevor Knight on the ground, get him out of the pocket, and make plays with his feet, and give his receivers time to get open. And that just hasn't happened a whole lot at this point.
Hey,
Yeah, I think what Ryan said. This is the big conundrum that I think OU faces is not getting Baker Mayfield automatically eligible. Are you going to risk Cody Thomas having to be your guy? Because we saw Trevor Knight leave 2 games last year because of injury, and he didn't play all that many games. Blake Bell played a good number of games, as OU fans well know. So the whole injury question, I think, has got to loom large. But Ryan and Jason have also said a couple things that I think OU that have to be looking at getting Trevor at least out of the pocket and on the move. He seems to throw it better when he's on the move, which isn't always the case with quarterbacks. So get him on the move. And I know our buddy Barry wrote earlier this week about, where Trevor has been the most effective. In the short passing game, he has been ridiculously effective. So if they can figure out a way to get some of that short stuff going, I know some fans hate that, but do you like winning? If you like winning, go with what the guy does best. And that seems to be one of the things he does really well.
well, Jason, one of the things he does really well is throw the ball to Sterling Shepard. ESPN is going to crib off one of your stories on Sterling Shepard. You, the nation's foremost authority on Sterling Shepard. What story are they doing?
Tom Rinaldi came to Norman last week to report on the story about Sterling and his father, and after his father's death, Bob Stoops essentially adopted Sterling into the OU football program as a 6-year-old kid, let him come around practice, let him go to games, let him in the locker room, basically just wanted him to be around and made sure that Sterling knew he was always welcome until he got to high school, and the NCAA doesn't allow things like that anymore because he's considered a recruit. Well, about his sophomore, junior year, Bob Stoops watched film of Sterling and realized that he's a pretty darn good football player, and so they recruited him, and the rest is history. So, I wrote that story 2 years ago just as Sterling was preparing for his first home game as an OU player. So it'll be pretty neat to see that on College Game Day.
A good story, really compelling photograph that Sterling's mom shared with us of him in his dad's shirt, I believe, standing in the end zone, looking out. Really cool story. Look for that, Tom Rinaldi. Going past Sterling Shepard, though, Ryan, it seems to me that there's a hanging question, not just about Trevor Knight and his passing, but who else can be a threat in the receiving corps? Give me a name, somebody you think could step up in the Cotton Bowl Saturday.
I think it's got to be Duron Neal. He's long overdue for a big game. Still hasn't had a touchdown, still hasn't had a 100-yard receiving game, but he's made plays for this team. I think it's time for him to make plays in a big game. I think he's the most likely guy outside of Sterling to make big plays in the passing game, and I think he'll on Saturday.
Jenny, flipping it over on the other side of the ball, a reader, Jerry, on News OK Live page says that Texas is licking their chops to get another shot at OU target Zach Sanchez. Is there a thought that Zach's interceptions are a product of being targeted and that people feel like they can exploit him?
Well, I think that there's probably a little bit of some of that. I think interceptions are always a little bit of a team effort. You got to have the defensive line. You got to have the linebackers, the safeties. I think it all has to work together, and that's obviously a great end result. But, I'm not sure if I was Texas, I'd be all fired up about, taunting the OU defense. I think Tyrone Swoops is likely to make mistakes if you pressure him. So if OU can get some heat on him, I think that there's a good chance that he might throw the ball to the Sooners a time or two, and that may include Zach Sanchez. I'm not saying that David Ash was a world beater, but I think he was less prone to do that sort of thing. So I think Swoops is a guy that, in a first really big game, if you get him rattled, I think that could be a long day for him in that Texas passing game.
Jason, a couple new quarterbacks making their OU Texas starts. We made a big deal out of Charlie Strong, but both Trevor Knight and Tyrone Swoops getting their first start. What do you think, a question from a guest on News OK Live, wanted to know what's the vibe around the team this week? Are the Sooners confident, determined? Do you get a feel for what the vibe around the Sooners is?
Yeah, I think they're confident. I think that they are eager to get back on the field. and maybe prove some people wrong. And I also think that that last year's loss is still really lingers for this team. And they won't go all the way and use the word revenge or anything like that, but you definitely get the sense that that's something that's motivating them. Because last year they were expected to roll Texas pretty easily, and didn't, and they really got rolled. And this year, Texas enters with a really similar start to their season, and they really seem to be having a lot of trouble on offense, and this sort of feels like last year again. And so I think OU really is determined to not let that happen again.
Guys, give me one player from Texas that really should give the Sooners cause for concern. You start, Ryan Aber, because you put together that feature for today's editions of the Oklahoman.
Well, I think I'd go with the running back, Jonathan Gray. I think if Texas is able to be successful in this game offensively, it's going to be because they're moving the ball on the ground, and that starts with Gray. OU has been really good run defense-wise all season. Haven't had a guy run for over 100 yards against them. If that changes, then Texas has a chance in this game because their defense is really good.
Jason, who on the Texas side are you looking at?
Well, like Ryan said, Jonathan Gray is one just because of what he did last year. Also, Malcolm Brown, the other running back. I also look at the defensive Texas Malcolm Brown, spelled differently. He's a defensive tackle who has really been one of Texas's best players this year. I think that'll be a real challenge for Ty Darlington at center. He's still relatively new as a starter, and I think this will be a big challenge for him.
Jenny, this is a team that struggled to beat Kansas. In fact, things have gone so poorly that all of a sudden now at Kansas, losing to Texas gets the coach fired. Is it plausible? I mean, Barry picked Texas to win on his theory that whoever won last year's game wins this year's game. But then he added the fact that the Sooners looked like no great shakes. They were shaky against TCU. What's the recipe for Texas to upset the Sooners?
Well, I think it's probably going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Their offense is, not great. They've probably got more difference makers and playmakers on offense than on defense. But if they can get OU offensively thinking, man, here we are struggling again, I think that could be big. Obviously OU got off to a really good start offensively at TCU, but finished the game clunking along, not really able to find any rhythm, any mix that worked. I think if Texas's defense could establish early and get some 3 and outs, that could raise some doubts in OU's head, and clearly, that's an issue not only for players but for coaches and how they're going to address the play calling. Are they going to try to stick with the run and really pound it, which has been shown itself to be pretty darn efficient, but that they went away from? Are they going to try to depend on Trevor Knight's arm? I think that could really be big if Texas's defense could get some 3 and outs early and get OU thinking, man, this does not look good against this defense.
Kyle, let's talk about the Cowboys at Kansas. You guys have done your best to pull out the most intriguing, relevant topics geared to this game, which is not all that compelling of a matchup otherwise. You gave us 5 reasons to watch on Monday in case readers missed it. They're out there right now on News OK. What's the number 1 reason to watch in your mind, Kyle?
Like you said, it was kind of tough to even come up with those 5 reasons, to be completely honest with you, because this figures to be a game where the Cowboys win easily. But of those 5 that I came up with early in the week, I think the biggest thing that I'm looking for is just seeing a lot of these young guys play. If OSU can get out to a good start and get a sizable lead by halftime, we should be seeing the second stringers by the third quarter. And with so much youth on this team, we've already seen a lot of first-year guys step in and have success. But there's been some young players who haven't had a chance, basically because coach doesn't feel like they're ready, or they just haven't been part of the mix so far. So when we look at some of those newcomers, some guys that I'm looking for to see how they perform with some live action snaps, come at the linebacker position, because through these first 5 games, we've really only seen the starters out there in Ryan Simmons, Seth Jacobs, and Josh Furman. Behind them is a bunch of really young guys, 2 true freshmen, and Jesse Akem and Justin Phillips, guys who have got a lot of good talk coming into fall camp and have made some big special teams plays. I think we all remember that massive hit that Justin Phillips had on the punt return. So these guys are young guys with a lot of upside who figure to be future contributors, and this is a game where we're going to see them play, and it'll be interesting to see how they fare.
Jenny, for a guy who was looking towards the future for a very long time, it's finally arrived for Dax Garman. You got a column coming up in Saturday's edition. It'll be on News OK later today about his first road start. And you went to a guy who knows what it's like. You talked to our good friend Clint Shelf about it. Do you make much of this idea? And they're playing Kansas. It appears to be a name the score type thing. Is his first road start an obstacle at all for Dax Garman?
Well, we can't know until we know, but Clint had some great insight because he lockered right next to Dax Garman for the last year. So he got to see Garman up close and personal every day, in addition to seeing him in practice and in the meeting room and in the film room. So he has a pretty good idea of what this guy's about. And the thing that he said to me is that Dax is very calm, very collected, doesn't get rattled. And Clint brought up the fact that when Dax was in practice these last couple years, it's largely been as the third team guy, which Clint has good knowledge of, as everybody knows, spending a good amount of time as the third string quarterback until he got the starting nod. And, he brought up the fact that when you're out there with the third teamers, stuff goes wrong all the time. There's a reason that those guys are third teamers. They don't always know what they're doing. And so you're out there as a quarterback trying to make a name for yourself, and obviously Dax being a walk-on, that was definitely the case. But Clint said Dax never showed that it got to him. He always stayed real calm, real collected. Obviously, there's going to be thousands of fans in the stands. It's going to be a whole different environment. But he said, in that position every day when it would be really easy to get rattled, Dax stayed within himself, continued to play and do what he could. So, Clint's thought was, the fact that you've got a game that's not the toughest opponent, not the toughest environment, and the way this guy's demeanor is, he really thought that Dax had a great chance to go out and have a great performance. And it's a great get your feet wet opportunity, considering what OSU has coming up with road games at Fort Worth, at Waco, at Norman, places that are going to be a whole lot tougher to play. Dax Garman can get this one under his belt and then go play those games down the road.
Jenny, I thought that point about the third team stuff was very interesting and insightful. It always makes you wonder or qualify Mike Gundy's comments in the past about how even Brandon Whedon wasn't a great practice player. How can you be a great practice player when you're out there performing with the third team guys?
Right.
So
yeah, it was a great point by Clint, and as I said, he obviously has great understanding of how frustrating that can be to be in that third team quarterback position. And Whedon was third team, turned out great. Clint was third team, ended up being pretty solid for the Cowboys. And here Dax Garman is again showing again what kind of depth of talent the Cowboys have had at that position, and maybe that experience sort of adds to that mentality of being able to handle stuff, learning how to deal with adversity, because you're dealing with it every day in practice. I thought it was a great point by Clint.
Guys, let's end the Football Friday Hangout here. The revolution that took place or continued last Saturday across college football has left us with this. 2 teams, most of you are not old enough to remember this, but 2 teams that were left by the side of the road, one by the Southwest Conference, the other attempted by the Big 12, TCU and Baylor. The team that the Big 12 actually probably took begrudgingly, and the other one that it didn't take until there was a mass exodus, are now playing the game of the year, as it is right now, in the Big 12. Just an hour and a half down the road from the Cotton Bowl. TCU, Baylor. Doesn't involve Oklahoma, doesn't involve either of the teams, but it impacts both teams greatly. Let's start with your pick, your discussion on how you think that game is going to go. Jenny, I'll start with you.
Sure. I picked Baylor in that game, and here's why. Even though I like what TCU did last week, I mean, obviously their defense, we know what they can do. I'm still not to the point that I'm on the Trayvon Boykin bandwagon, and I'll freely admit that. I've seen him the last couple years and just thought he was so-so. And so I know that the offense has changed, but much like I think we got baited into believing that Trevor Knight was who we saw against Alabama, I'm not quite ready to think Trayvon Boykin is exactly who we saw him as against the Sooners. I want to see a little bit more out of him. And to me, the quarterback that we've got a lot more evidence of how good he is wearing the green on Saturday. So I'm going with Baylor in this one. It's at home. Obviously, it's going to be hyped. The environment's going to be great. But I like the fact that Baylor's got a more experienced, more known commodity at quarterback. I think Baylor wins in a great game on Saturday.
Ryan Aber, TCU has got the most impressive win of those two teams, beating OU last week. Baylor doesn't really have anything like that to show so far. Who do you have?
I picked TCU to win this game before the season. I said it was my Big 12 upset of the year. Doesn't look like it's big an upset now, but I still picked the Horned Frogs. I believe it went 33-30. I think Boykin, I do still have some issues with him. I think he's going to have some times where he's going to make mistakes, but I don't think this is the week. I think the way he performed last week really impressed me. I think he's going to be able to do some of those things. Baylor's offense last week didn't look good at all. They scored 28 points, which isn't much for them, period. But two of those touchdowns came thanks to their defense and special teams. So I think TCU is going to hold on and stay undefeated.
Kyle, the Baylor team that we saw last year against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State really had some great athletes, people flying around. Of course, the Cowboys handled them in Stillwater. The Sooners lost to them in Baylor. But when I saw that TCU-OU game, that reminded me a little bit of last year's Baylor team. TCU impressed me. Who are you picking?
I've got TCU as well in this one, 31-28, and I think when we look at this matchup, we got to ask ourselves, who has Baylor really played to this point? You know, they've looked impressive against SMU, Northwestern State, Buffalo, Iowa State, and then like Ryan had just mentioned, they didn't look all that great against Texas. So I think this sets up well for another breakout performance for TCU to prove that they belong in the conversation as the Big 12's best at this point in the year.
TCU win, of course, would be bad news for the Sooners. They got no chance to avenge that. They get a chance to beat Baylor. They play Baylor in Norman, but the outcome is already there. That would be bad for the Sooners. Jason, who you picking?
Well, you know, when I filled out my picks for the paper and I picked TCU, I thought I was going to be different, but apparently I'm not. I picked TCU 35-34. I sort of agree with what the other guys said. I think that Baylor did not look great against Texas. I don't think that they are quite the dynamic team that we thought they were. And TCU is bringing a lot of momentum into this game, and we've seen what they're capable of. So yeah, I'm going with the Horned Frogs as well.
Hey, thanks, guys. That's all for this edition of Football Friday, but you can stay with the best coverage team every day at News OK and every morning in the Oklahoman. Enjoy the games.